Are you confused with all the craziness going on in the world right now? Doesn't it feel like gold and silver should be much, much higher than they are? Why don't we talk about the big stinky bear in the room, the Ukraine war? Let's take a look at that. There's a lot of different news sources, a lot of different perspectives, right, on what's going on. How are we to get any kind of idea about what the real situation looks like? And how would that impact gold and silver? Have you thought about that long term? Let's talk about that and a lot more right now. When things get a little too crazy in the world, you can always join this crazy guy in his basement in St. Louis. You are always welcome here. If you get some value out of my content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, turn on the ring-a-ling-ding-a-ling. There's like a little bell you can press. That way you'll get notified every time I put out a new video, and let me know your thoughts. You're joining me from all over the world. This is just you and I right now. Your thoughts matter. I value your time. I value your thoughts. Please share if you think you have something pertinent to say. You don't have to agree with me, but I want to hear what you have to say. Now, let's clear one thing up regarding this whole situation about war. I hope, and I believe that you feel the same way I do. We don't like war, right? The average, everyday people like us are the ones who are suffering. Now, I'm not suffering. I'm tucked away here in my basement in the middle of the United States of America, but average, everyday people in Europe in general, but especially in the Ukraine, are suffering horrendously right now. And look, the average, everyday people, they don't pull the strings. They didn't make these decisions. This is really, like a lot of wars, the reality is it's an argument between a bunch of rich people. And do you agree that as the world is going through, doesn't it feel like a massive, massive change right now? The East and the West. I've never seen this in my lifetime, where countries and nations are separating from one another at a pace that is breathtaking. And this is very interesting. As these countries separate from each other, isn't the currency system used in the West, the fiat money system, isn't it based essentially on trust? Isn't a breakdown in international geopolitical relations a divide? Isn't that alone a breakdown in trust? And aren't we seeing that these Eastern countries are making solid, bold moves, right, toward more real-backed currencies? They are talking about gold, silver, oil, real assets as a mean to back up their currencies. Putin even said the end of the imaginary make-believe money system is over, and now we're looking at real assets to base our currencies upon. Doesn't that paint a pretty picture for the price of gold, for the price of silver, as we move into the coming decades and maybe even century? But let's focus down a little bit more on what's going on in the war right now. What do we know? Well, it's hard to know what to know. We have reports from the West. We have reports from the East. They seem to be very, very different. When it comes to the Russian military, right? In the West, we hear these stories that, oh, the Russian military is falling apart and they're using old weapons and the morale is horrible and they're doomed and, you know, it's a big folly and a big failure. But at the same time, if we listen to reports from the other side, I've heard people say that the Russians have only used 20% of their military and they haven't really tried yet. They've been holding back. So maybe somewhere in the middle lies the truth. If you heard that saying, what do you think about that? I don't know. I mean, I have no clue. I'm not there. But I do know we're getting very disparate reports on just alone the strength of the Russian military and how well they have been performing. The other thing we do know is that they put a new general in charge. They refer to him as General Armageddon. And I saw a couple pictures of this guy and listened to a couple brief interviews that he did. He seems like a very aggressive, kind of scary leader that they now have in charge of their, as they call it, special operation in Ukraine. And who the heck blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, right? The West blames Russia, Russia blames the West. You can like read into both of their stories and they both seem plausible, but at the end of the day, we know that a major pipeline that was a major economic pipeline for Russia as well, that's how they sold all their natural gas to Germany and Europe, that it was essentially destroyed by high explosives. And nobody's taken responsibility for it. It's like a big mystery, right? And now it gets genuinely very, very scary because we have this massive hydroelectric dam in the south of Ukraine in a territory now controlled by the Russians, and both sides are kind of blaming each other preemptively that somebody might use a small nuclear type weapon to blow up this hydroelectric dam, which would just cause massive flooding devastation, number one. But number two, that dam, that water that it holds back is a key source for cooling for a major nuclear plant also in the south of Ukraine. And do you live in Europe, or do you have friends that live in Europe? I'm curious how the average European, the average everyday guy like me, like you, that just goes to work, maybe has a small business, tries to pay the bills, just wants to survive. How does the average European feel about what's going on? I hear reports that there's protests against NATO, but then you also hear that the European NATO countries are firmly united in their support of Ukraine. I'm not casting judgment either way. I'm just curious what's really going on the ground in Europe. Apparently, on a government level, there's been some fracture, small fracture within NATO. The Germans have backed out of some military projects that they were going to do, and the French apparently said that they would not respond with nuclear weapons if there was a small-scale nuclear attack in Ukraine. Now, who knows what that means and how significant that is, but are we starting to see some dissent within the NATO countries in Europe? I don't know. Again, not casting judgment. Curious your thoughts on that matter. And what about China and India on this subject? Don't forget, they have billions and billions of people. They are both fast-growing economic powers. They will be likely the economic superpowers we'll be dealing with in the coming decades. When it comes to the situation in Ukraine, neither are saying a whole lot, but when we judge them by their actions and the fact that they often abstain from censuring Russia in regards to their special operation, it feels like they're more siding with the eastern side of the team. And do you know anything about Iran? As far as I understand, Iran has kind of traditionally been an enemy of the West. It appears Iran is supplying weapons to the Russians to be used in their special operation in Ukraine. Look, this all gets very foggy, very confusing. The one thing we do know for sure is that there's a lot of pain and suffering going on for the average people in Ukraine. So our hearts are with them. And can't we say for sure also that this is just a screwed up situation? But these things happen if we open history books. The other thing we'll learn if we open history books is that precious metals have provided people with safety and security through all types of major geopolitical events. For centuries, for thousands and thousands of years, they have maintained their value everywhere in the world and always. So we hope the situation in Europe, in Ukraine, unfolds in a manner which allows everyday average people like you, like me, to live peacefully and prosperously. Hey, I'll be here's what I'm trying to say, for you, wherever you are in the world, through it all. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.